Scotland, a kingdom that when I left off was dealing with the Black Death and saw the English King Edward III die, ending the payments for the Scottish King David II ransom. Now King Robert II had 7 sons. The eldest, Robert III, originally John Stuart before ascending to the throne, his brother Duke Robert, who had the real power until his mysterious death. Side note, he is largely agreed to be responsible for the death of the heir apparent, his nephew David Stuart, the Duke of Albany. Their brother, the Lord of Fife Walter Stuart, Earl of Buck and Alistair Stuart, Earl of Strahan and Caithness David Stuart, Earl of Atholl Walter, and Bishop of St Andrews Thomas Stuart. That's 2 Roberts, 2 Walters, an Alistair or Alexander, a David and a Thomas. Not much important would happen, aside from the kings weakening the power of clan nobles and taking the power themselves. It wasn't until the great-great-grandson of Robert II, James III Stuart, married Margaret of Denmark. The dowry was the Orkney and Shetland Islands. A decent gift, I'd say. James III Stuart's son, James Stuart, married Margaret Tudor of England. This added a knot that tied the Tudor and Stuart families together, something that would be useful later. James aka King James IV, is known for ending the semi-independent kings of the Isles, which included the Hebrides, Argyll, Isle of Man and the other islands in the area. The Isle of Man, however, was no longer a Scottish possession, at least not entirely. The rule of the land was a heavily tumultuous one as Edward I, the Hammer of the Scots, took the island in 1290, the Scottish Independence War. The ownership of the land traded between the 2 kingdoms before the island asserted independence. King William le Scrope, Earl of Wiltshire, was the last king of Man from 1333 until 1399 when Richard II of England seized the island, before dying the next year, aged 33. Moving back to the land, Scotland saw the creation of several prestigious universities during the 15th century. The University of St Andrew, in 1413. The University of Glasgow, in 1450. The University of Aberdeen, in 1495. The next year saw James IV pass the Education Act 1496, which decreed that all the sons of barons or free state holders must attend grammar school. James IV helped Scottish culture bloom during the Renaissance. 1512 saw the Auld Alliance renewed in another Franco-English-Scottish War. This was a part of the larger War of the League of Cambrai, 1508 to 1516, which itself was a part of the larger Italian Wars, 1494 to 1559. These European nobles sure do love their wars. A war, which was a part of a larger war, which itself was a part of a larger war. The war saw King James IV lead the army, with many Scottish nobles to the Battle of Flodden. Not a good idea. The 26,000 English were led by Thomas Howard, 2nd Duke of Norfolk, Lord Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk, Lord Edmund Howard, 2nd Baron of Dacre, Thomas Dacre, and Edward Stanley, 1st Baron of Monteagle. Leading the 30 to 40,000 Scots were King James IV Stuart, 3rd Lord Alexander Holme, 1st Earl of Montrose William Graham, 2nd Earl of Bothwell, Adam Hepburn, 2nd Earl of Lennox, Matthew Stewart, a distant cousin to the royal family, and 2nd Earl of Argyll, Archibald Campbell. While all the English leaders survived, only Alexander Holmes survived amongst the Scottish. The English lost 1.5 to 5,000 and the Scottish lost 5 to 14,000 soldiers. A definitive loss. 4 children. James IV had James Duke of Rothesay, died after 11 months, Duke of Rothesay Arthur, 1509 to 1510, Duke of Ross, Alexander 1514 to 1515, and James V, 1512 to 1542. With the king's death, his son James V, the nephew of Henry VIII was crowned king. the English king's sister being the mother of James V. He was crowned king at the ripe old age of 17 months. His mother and her new husband, Archibald Douglas, of the powerful clan Douglas, the strongest clan besides the Stuarts, were acting regent until 1528. Age 16. The first thing he did was confiscate the Douglas land and exiled Archibald Douglas. Guess he didn't like his stepdad much. James V built the College of Justice in 1532, mainly to reduce the lack of control on the Hebrides and the borderlands. King James V's first wife Madeline of Valois died at the age of 16 while he was about 24. She was born in poor health, and the move from temperate France to the colder Scotland weakened her body immensely. Dying 6 months after they married, she had no children. He married Mary of Guise in 1538 and bore James V 3 illegitimate children: Duke James, 1540 to 1541; Duke Ross, April 12, 1541, April 20, 1541; and Mary, 1542 to 1567. As you can see, the Maillars all died before being adult. So their sister, Mary, would become the queen unless James had any legitimate sons. That is because her dad made the bold decision to die on the 14th of December, 1542, 6 days after his daughter's birth. It was cholera or dysentery, but he should have just not got it. He makes the third King James to die at or before the age of 40 in a row. Triple kill. So the baby Mary was the only remaining legitimate heir. I say legitimate as James V had many a bastard. Bastard being the word for a child born out of wedlock. 9 of these royal bastards are known. James Stuart, Commissioner of the Abbeys of Melrose and Kelso, 1529 to 1557. John Stuart, Prior of Coldingham, Baron of Darnley, 1531 to 1563. Another James Stuart, 1st Earl of Moray, 1531 to 1570. Another James Stuart, 1532 to 1532, son of Christina Berkeley. Robert Stuart, 1st Earl of Orkney, 1533 to 1593. A recognized illegitimate son. Whatever that means. Adam Stuart, 1535 to 1575. Lady Jean Stuart, 1533 to 1538. Another Robert Stuart, born sometime before 1542, died 1581. Before he died of cholera or dysentery, his uncle Henry VIII broke from the Catholic faith and asked him to do the same. James V told him to piss off, and Edward sent an organized army of 3,000, while the Scottish sent an unorganized force of 15 to 18,000. At the Battle of Solway Moss, 7 British soldiers died while 20 Scottish soldiers died in combat, 1,200 were captured and hundreds more drowned in the river. The massive loss is believed to be partially responsible for a worsening James V's health. King Henry VIII tried to arrange a political marriage between the child Mary, Queen of Scots, and the child, Prince Edward, but the Scottish nobles denied it. This led to the Rough Wooing War. King Henry died in 1547 and Prince Edward became King Edward VI, aged 9. He died in 1553, aged 15. Because of his death, the entire justification for the War of the Rough Wooing was gone. So it just stopped. Fun. In 1558, the teen Queen Mary traveled to France to marry the Dauphin, Francis II of Valois-Angoulême. Their marriage was a long and happy one, for 2 years until Francis II died. Francis II became king in 1559 after his father's death, aged 15, before he too died in 1560. This meant that Queen Mary of Scotland was also Queen Mary of France for 17 months. When he expired, she returned to Scotland. She would marry Duke of Albany, Henry Stuart, using the French Stuart over the Scottish Stuart, a descendant of James II and Henry VII. Through his mother he was the great-grandson of Henry VII. With the union, Mary could claim the throne of England, both through Henry and herself. Odds are that she would have been Queen of England after her cousin Mary and Elizabeth died, for there was a small issue of her being Catholic. Henry VIII declared that England would be an Anglican nation and created the Church of England in 1534. The law of succession said that the monarchs of England had to be Anglican, as they were the head of the Church, which meant no Catholics. So no. Queen Mary had one child with Henry Stuart, James Charles Stuart. They probably would have had more, but Henry suffered from a small case of being murdered in 1567 because he was hated. His house in Kirklefield exploded with gunpowder, but the autopsy showed that he was strangled. Many thought Mary and her lover James Hepburn, 4th Earl of Bothwell, who she married in 3 months, were responsible. Whatever it was, he was acquitted and that was that. But people in Scotland didn't like James Hepburn. Mary's son, James Charles, became King James VI after his mother was quote-unquote advised to abdicate the throne to him. His bastard, half-uncle, also called James Stuart, the 1st Earl of Moray, was the regent for the king from 1567 to 1570, when he was assassinated. James Hamilton of Bothwell and Woodhouseley, a supporter of Queen Mary, shot him dead. Matthew Stuart, spelt with a W, 4th Earl of Lennox, father of Henry Stuart, spelt with a U, acted as regent from 1570 until he died in 1571. He was also shot dead, this time by Queen Elizabeth I's supporters. John Erskine, Earl of Mar, took guardianship of the child king, as his father did for James V and Queen Mary. He was regent from 1571 to 1572. Before he died, likely poisoned by the Earl of Morton. He was succeeded by the Earl of Morton, James Douglas, acting regent 1572 to 1581. Despite this, King James VI didn't gain full control until 1583. As the King of Scotland, he also had a claim to the Irish throne and the English throne, through having an ancestor on his mother's and father's side who was related to the king. Wales isn't included as the English Britain is just a funny-speaking English province. This was realized as Queen Elizabeth finally died. Not her, the first one. Queen Elizabeth I died without an heir, as did her sister and their boy king brother. The next in line for the throne would have been Lady Jane Grey, the 9-day queen, also a Protestant. The issue was that the 17-year-old lady was executed, because Edward VI had her as his heir apparent in the likely case that the sick child died with no children. He also disinherited his sisters before he died. Because Catholic Mary I of England didn't like this and led her Catholic supporters to the castle, then had the 9-day queen locked in the Tower of London, before being murdered. So bloody, Mary I spent 5 years undoing the anti-Catholic work her father did. She died of uterine cancer and Elizabeth became the second recognized Queen of England. The Virgin Queen ruled from 1558 to 1603. No heirs. So the crown passed her nearest relative Lady Jane Grey. Oh! So now there was an issue. The closest relative to the English throne was the Queen of the Scots, Mary, Elizabeth's first cousin once removed. Mary's grandma being the older sister of Henry VIII. Issue though, Mary Queen of Scots was dead. She was beheaded in 1583 for conspiring to kill Elizabeth. Apparently. Maybe it's true, but that meant that the closest ruler for the English to steal was James VI. So in 1603, James VI became James VI of Scotland and James I of England and Ireland. Officially, he was the King of Scotland, and Ireland and England. The two crowns were officially separated, but he claimed to be king of a united Great Britain kingdom, just 104 years early. But side notes: 1. Despite being a king of Scotland and England plus Ireland, He moved to London and became more of an English king than a king of the Scottish throne and the Irish-English throne. 2. King James helped codify the Bible, hence the King James edition. King James also sent 50,000 Scots to Ulster to replace the Irish, because racism. The Scots also established 5 colonial possessions, which didn't go well. The first Scottish colony was Nova Scotia, or New Scotland in 1629. That was okay. Between the first and second colonies, the kings of Scotland basically became English, and that's not why I'm here. Inserts the English Civil War and Oliver Cromwell stuff. The Civil War was the most lethal war in English history, as it was English against English. The second colony was when the Scottish were granted a charter to East Jersey in 1683. The Scottish East Jersey and English West Jersey remained separated until 1702. 1684 saw 2 counties in Carolina purchased for Scottish settlements. This established the Stewards town. 1695 saw New Caledonia and the Isthmus of Panama. This failed quite badly. So badly in fact that it bankrupted Scotland so bad that they signed the Act of Union 1707, ruled by Queen Anne Stuart and Prince George of Denmark. 1735 saw the establishment of New Inverness, now Darien, Georgia. By 1745, the Scottish were ruled over by Hanover German lords. As Queen Anne Stuart was the last of the Stuart monarchs, but the first ruler of Great Britain. Her second cousin succeeded her as her children didn't live long enough to become king or queen. So the German, Prince-Elector, Georg Ludwig became George I of England, though he spent most of the time in his homeland of Hanover. Shortly after her death, and the start of King George's reign, a group known as the Jacobites, which supported the Queen's half-brother James Francis Edward Stuart, the Lord High Steward of Scotland, arose to have him as king. But he was Catholic, so no good. James Francis became known as the Old Pretender by the Whig Party. His son, Charles Edward Stuart, the New Pretender, would also lead a Jacobite rebellion, 1720 to 1745, which the son of King George II, William the Butcher Cumberland, led the English army. The Jacobites' failure led to a ban on Scottish tartans and symbols for several decades. The Jacobites' name coming from the Latin word for James, Jacobus, hence the Jacobites. From 1750 to 1860, the Highland Clearance took place. This saw Scottish families deported from their homeland and told, "Figure it out." Much of the sea's land was used for ranch land. The houses of the people were burned and much of the Highlanders moved to the New World, or Oceania. Roughly 16,000 people. Ironically, the ranches of the cleared Highlands were outcompeted by the new ranches established by the Highlanders in Oceania. Take that! In 1850s, the Irish potato famine and the Highland potato famine hit, and the English Parliament said, "Stuff happens, but you better keep exporting what little food you are making or we'll imprison you." Well, in Scotland, the provision of food was provided by Sir Charles Trevelyan, first baronet, to keep the people alive. Ireland was just abandoned, despite the efforts of Robert Peel. This famine was worsened because of political machinations and conspiratorial dissuasion that the Great Starving was real. Given the severity of the situations, I'll leave it at that. The late 18th century saw large-scale industrialization and the construction of railways. 1800 saw the Act of Union, which handcuffed Ireland to Great Britain, like it did with Scotland to England and Wales, making the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. The 19th century saw the population of Scotland quadruple from 1.6 million in 1801 to 4.47 million in 1901. 1832 saw the Scottish Reform Act increase the number of MP in the Scottish Parliament, allowing more middle-class groups to enter. The American Civil War of 1861 saw the flow of cotton stop, which crippled the Scottish textile industry. This forced the industrial focus to switch to smelting and metal work. Large shipyards and train yards appeared. This led to Scotland to become the vehicular heart of the empire. Before the First World War, 1 million of the 4.7 million people in Scotland were coal miners, roughly 21.25% of the country. By the early 20th century, 3,500 miles of rails connected Scotland, but it was largely used to transport coal. That's because much of the country was not urbanized. 44% of the people lived in the counties of Lanarkshire, Renfrewshire, Dunbartonshire, and Ayrshire. Or put more simply, the counties that are near the capital Glasgow, and the nearby ports. Well-known Scottish authors of the time were Robert Louis Balfour Stevenson, author of Treasure Island and The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde; Sir Arthur Ignatius Conan Doyle, author of A Study in Scarlet, The Hound of the Baskervilles, and the works of Sherlock Holmes. He particularly disliked Sherlock and believed that it was a waste of his talent. Despite the disdain that the English held for the Scots for being different, this changed when the newly crowned King George IV visited Scotland, the first English king to do so in 2 centuries. This visit diffused some of the tension that had appeared because of the harsh crushing to the Jacobite rebellion, in 1745. This was much needed as the new, obese King George IV was not well liked by the people. The novel Waverley, or, 'Tis 60 Years Since, the actual title of the book, romanticized the Highlands in 1815. Kilts and tartans were a staple of the attire, despite being illegal because of the Dress Act from 1746 to 1782. When King George IV was seen wearing a kilt, the demand for them sharply increased. Notable Scottish immigrants include Sir John Alexander Macdonald, the first Prime Minister of Canada, born in Glasgow; Scottish-Canadian Alexander Graham Bell, one of the 2 inventors of the phone, the other being the Italian Antonio Meucci. Bell was born in Edinburgh. John Paul Jones, Scottish-American sailor, first well-known naval commander, born Ardingland, Kirkcudbrightshire. Major General Sir Thomas MacDougall Brisbane, 1st Baronet, a British Army officer, administrator, and astronomer, born Largs, Ayrshire. The 1900s is basically dominated by the wars. Then again, that always seems like the case. If the UK, basically England, was involved in a war, so too would Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, if they wanted to or not. During the Boer War, a special Scottish division, known as the 1st Cavalry Division, comprised of the 2nd and 6th Dragoon Guards. They were notable for having taken part in the Battle of Paardeberg. Then there's the First World War, the one where everyone was cousins or that. George V was related to Tsar Nicholas II through their moms being sisters, and George V and Kaiser Wilhelm II being related by the Kaiser's mother Victoria being the sister of Edward VII of England. The Kaiser and the Tsar were also second cousins once removed, with the Tsar's great-grandfather marrying Princess Charlotte of Prussia, with Princess Charlotte being the great-aunt of Kaiser Wilhelm II. Constantine I of Greece was also related to them as his mother was Olga Konstantinovna, and his grandson Philip would later marry Princess Elizabeth. He would be known as the Duke of Edinburgh, Philip. Anyway, because of the leaders being related, the Great War is referred to as the Cousins' War. During the war, I could find 3 Irish divisions, the Irish 10th and 16th Division, as well as the Ulster 36th Division serving. 35 Royal Scots Division, 15 being regular combatants, and the 38 and 53 Welsh Infantry Division. Know that I'm going off century-old records found online, so there may be errors. Of the Royal Scots Divisions, the Cameron Highlanders deserve an important notice. The Cameron Highlanders 79th Regiment, which was 13 battalions strong in 1914. They are notable for an image of them circulating that was taken before and another that was said to be taken after the war. It showed 1,000 soldiers and 27 officers of the 1st Battalion, outside Edinburgh Castle. The second image is fake but was made to represent the losses of the war. The second image had 28 soldiers, compared to the 1,027 soldiers at the start of the war. The real fate of the 1,000 soldiers is unknown, but of the 13 battalions, roughly 13,000 men, 5,930 died. They received 57 battle awards and 3 Victoria Crosses. To put this into perspective, the male population of England and Wales in 1913 was 17.7 million. The total population of Ireland was 3.1 million in 1913. The total population of Scotland in 1914 was 4.7 million. In 1914, the UK Army had a small professional army of 247,400 men. By 1916, the British Expeditionary Force neared 2.04 million. From 1911 to 1921, the UK population was around 42 million, meaning 1/21st UK citizens served. In the total empire, including the Dominion of Canada, Australia, New Zealand, British Raj and overseas territories, fielded 8.9 million, second only to the 12 million Russian soldiers. Of the 8.9 million UK soldiers, 900,000 were killed, 2.1 million were wounded and 191,000 were captured or missing in action, meaning 3.19 million casualties or 35.8% of the total army injured or killed, and 10.1% were killed in action. Of that 8.9 million, 100 or 135,000 Scots served, nearly 3% of the population. The Scottish National War Memorial was constructed from 1924 to 1927 when Prince Edward Windsor, formerly Prince Edward Saxe-Coburg-Gotha until 1917, opened the memorial. The thing between the two wars saw the Great Depression devastate everything besides southern England. Of the roughly 45 million people, 3 million were unemployed, with unemployment rates reaching 70%, some in cities. British exports have to compare to 1929 rates. Between 1925 to 1931, the British returned in on return to the gold standard. 1933 saw a slow reduction in interest and an increased focus on stimulating economic growth. In 1935–1936, unemployment rates slowly fell, but much of the change was focused on South England, definitely not a trend. By 1937, unemployment fell to 1.5 million, but rose to 1.81 million by 1938. Much of the decrease was due to the rearmament in the event of German aggression. With the German invasion of Poland in September 1939, the Allied powers declared war on them but didn't really do much until 1940. Compared to World War I, the Scottish presence in World War II is much harder to identify, at least for me, as they were more so incorporated into the general British Army. Battles were less clear-cut, as they were in the First World War. They were more or less blended together into theatres of battle, such as the European Front, African Front or Asian Front. The 2nd Royal Scots Division served in Hong Kong for 17 days in 1941. And the 1st Royal Scots Division served in the First Draken Campaign in Burma for 4 months in 1943. The 1st Division also served for 5 months in 1944 in Kohima, India, and 4 months in Mandalay, Burma, 1945. While much of the Scottish forces served alongside the English, the 15th Scottish Infantry Division, they served as a part of Operation Epsom during the D-Day invasion. They helped overrun the German outpost line with the help of artillery. Something else to note was Lieutenant Colonel John Malcolm Thorpe Fleming Churchill, being of an Anglo-Scottish heritage. He was born in Colombo, Ceylon, 1906, but was known for serving as a part of the Commando Corps. In the No. 3 Commando raid on Norway, he was known for landing with a bow and arrow, a Scottish claymore and bagpipes. As they landed on 27 December 1941, Colonel John Churchill played the March of the Cameramen on the bagpipes before charging the German lines with a sword. During the war, he escaped multiple POW camps, survived several explosions, and he was the most recent person to get a recorded kill with a bow in a war. He shot and killed a Nazi sergeant with a long bow during the Dunkirk retreat of 1940. The Royal Norwegian Explorers Club named him one of the greatest adventurers of all time. He served with the Yugoslav partisan during the attack of Brac. He fired every bullet he had, and was the last man standing. Taking out his bagpipes, he played "Will Ye No Come Back Again?" until a grenade knocked him out. He was taken to Berlin because they thought he was related to Winston Churchill. He was transferred to 2 different concentration camps and escaped from both. He eventually met up with the American forces in Verona, Italy. After the war, he served in the military parade in Palestine, where he helped evacuate hundreds of Jewish doctors when fighting broke out. The Scottish National War Memorial was modified to include memorials for all subsequent wars. In the Korean War, the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders, King's Own Scottish Borderers and Black Watch served. The Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders served during the Battle of Hill 282. In East Scotland, at Bathgate EH484NW, United Kingdom, a memorial to honor the soldiers of the Korean War stands. The Vietnam War was a controversial war. Whatever it was, many Scottish soldiers served, and a monument was erected to them at 41 degrees 41.895 N, 72 degrees 4.929 W Scotland, Connecticut, in Windham County, USA. Then we come to Attila the Hen, Maggie the Iron Lady, or Margaret Thatcher. If you live in southern England, you probably love her. If you live anywhere else in the UK, you probably hate her. I wasn't alive to see her as Prime Minister, but the sheer volume of disdain about her, good God! Firstly, she shut down the mines and factories, an act which mostly targeted the communities north of Bristol. The reason was to reduce inflation, which it did, I guess, but it cost 2 manufacturing jobs and a reduction of production and manufacturing by 30%. She slightly bettered the country at the expense of the industrial sector. Next, the milk snatcher removed the free milk for 7 to 11-year-olds. Then there was the poll tax, otherwise known as the biggest fuck you to the middle class. Quote, it provided for a single flat rate, per capita tax on every adult, at a rate set by the local authority. Instead of paying an appropriate amount based on income, which would be smart, it charged everyone a fixed amount. Doesn't matter if you make $200,000 or $20,000, every adult in the household needs to pay the rate set by the local authority to the government because they said so. Then there was her being the politician who oversaw the troubles. Wow. I'm just going to stop there. Scotland exists as a country which is a part of the Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. While they speak English, they also have the traditional language of Scots Gaelic, which is closer to Irish Gaelic. Then there's the Scots language, which is a descendant of Northumbrian Old English. Early Scots broke away from Northern Middle English around the 1400s. It became Middle Scots between 1450 to 1700, while the English spoke Early Modern English at this time. The 1700s saw Modern Scots and Modern English emerge. Distinct but still somewhat mutually intelligible, as Norwegian is to the Danish. Some say that Scots is a dialect of English, but try say to the Norwegians that they just speak a Danish dialect and see what happens. Of the Scots language, 5 major dialects exist. Southern Scots near the English border, Central Scots in the Central region, Northern Scots in Aberdeenshire and the Northern Highlands region, Insular Scots on the Orkney and Shetland Islands. The region's also home to the Northern Reconstruction language. Lastly, there's Ulster Scots. That's because Scots were sent to Ulster to replace the Irish speakers. Thanks King James. I'd continue further, but mentioning the Troubles and recent UK history will open a can of worms. So I will stop here. Remember, this is a joke, don't take anything too seriously. I also set up a Patreon, link in the description. If you want to influence what topic I'll cover next or want access to my scribbles, please go and check it out. Thanks for listening. Anyway, I've been the Irish Explainer, and this has been a brief rundown on Scotland and its history from the Middle Ages until the late 1900s. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to place them in the comments below. How did I do and what can I improve on? Let me know what I should cover next. Have a great day and make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.